Call this meeting to order and welcome Karen Day from KLJ to lead us through the presentation this afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have two replacement sheets that I provided to you. In preparing the text, the graphics got flipped, so I have extra copies if anybody needs them. So I brought the entire West Dickinson, well, not the entire, the leaders of the West Dickinson team today to facilitate, answering any questions that you had. So with me is Brent Malsom, and Brent is on your agenda later today also, and Bob Shannon to talk about transportation. And from Apex Engineering, Mike Berg is usually representing the firm, but today Scott Schneider is here. And then two other planners from KLJ, Joel Kleinbeck and Andrew Thero. So we brought all of our guns to answer any questions that you might have. So I'm going to start this presentation. Again, my name is Karen Day, and I lead KLJ's community planning team. This is our little agenda for today. We'll do a quick overview, and then focus on the future land use map. There are copies of the map, a copy of the map on the site. The strategic growth staging, and Mr. Kessel mentioned that a little bit earlier. That will help look forward to annexation strategies or infrastructure staging. And looking at future infrastructure and community service needs. And then we're suggesting, and it was also part of the Dickinson 2035 discussion, the levels of service for infrastructure and community facilities, and then looking at proposed goals and policies. Now, this plan is for the West Dickinson area, but it will be adopted, if you choose to do that, as an addendum to the existing plan. So policies that are in the existing plan and mapping that's in the existing plan will cover this area also. It just is, these are additional policies and additional mapping to be more specific for that area. All of the information that's has been presented to you before and today is on our website, www.dickinsonplan.com. And it has today's presentation, which is the graphic that's on the left. The entire PowerPoint will be uploaded tomorrow. And then the draft plan is already uploaded on that website today. So if your friends and neighbors want to look at it, it's there for their use. There's also links on there for people who want to provide comments on the draft or on anything else. This is the schedule. We've gone through a number of public meetings already, and this is where we are today. Starting a review of the draft plan, which is what you have. The approval and adoption meetings are yet to be scheduled, and we will discuss that at the end of the meeting. So just kind of overview of how we got to where we are. The basis of the future studies for this area is the work that we did on the future land use map. And as you will recall, we looked at four different concepts: a corridor growth plan, a westward growth, village nodal growth, and industrial focus growth. And then came up with a consensus concept. And you saw this when we were here the last time. And from that consensus concept, then we stepped forward and we developed this more detailed future land use map. And this map has categories that are existing on the adopted future land use map, and it has three additional categories and an overlay. So it has the interchange category because of the special nature of that interchange and the opportunities that it affords the city and the county. We thought that needed to be called out separately. It also has we call it a limited industrial, and limited is probably not the correct term for it, but it's a new industrial category. The only limitation on it is that it's new and would be subject to the policies that are proposed in this plan. The areas that are colored the darker purple are already either in place industrial uses or already zoned for industrial uses. And then this light yellowish color is called planned residential, and that's residential that you see in the staging occurring more in the future. There's also a overlay. It's called the Greenways overlay that follows these two major drainage ways, and they are proposed for a number of reasons to facilitate drainage, and then for the opportunity that they pose also for recreation, trails, etc. So all of that you have seen, and this is the looking at these residential categories and just doing a simple calculation of the number of acres, the percentage of residential that expected to be in those categories, and densities applied to them. 25,800 is a rough number of the number of people that could be accommodated in the West Dickinson study area in the future, the number of people that will fit. I think it's important to note that this area is not likely to be on the same timeline as the Dickinson 2035. It's my expectation that the timeline on this goes out beyond that. But in this city, you just never know how fast we're going to be growing. So this is, if the area develops out as we have mapped it and as we anticipate it to, that's about the number of people that would fit. In looking at the area and anticipating extensions of infrastructure, as you discussed in the last hour and a half, and potential annexation areas, these we've divided the area into these different ones. Labeled them I-94 area. That's the area that we see development interest very high today. Extended east area is essentially an extension of the city going further. The industrial focused area is basically along the 116 corridor to include the refinery and Hill Express, and then old Highway 10 area. And then the areas that are in the lighter green we see as more distant. This in time for development. This map is not intended to be lines that are in concrete. This is a generalization of how we see the area of growth being staged. We've put numbers on these areas now. Also on this exhibit is today's extraterritorial line, that yellow line on there, and today's urban service area boundary, the purple line on there. And so the area that's marked in one is, we consider those two areas together that would develop, we expect that they would develop earlier than others. That's not saying that a piece of something else might develop at the same time, but in general, in looking for planning infrastructure. And again, the number two area connected to the industrial development. Some of that may develop simultaneously with the first one, but generally we see that as additional development in that area, probably lagging behind. And the third are areas that are closer to the city. The characteristics are a little bit different. The fourth is kind of a combination of the industrial area connected to development off of 116, and then further east transitioning to residential. So if we look at that, in each of those stages, that's how many acres are assigned. If you look at that staging in a future land use map altogether, the first stage is primarily a split between commercial and residential, and then the second is it's along 116th again, so that's industrial and commercial. And the commercial in that instance is more heavier commercial, more industrial related commercial. This is not your Walmart or your beauty salon. This is more industrial related commercial. And then in that third area, the kind of mauve area that's closer to the city, is, again, industrial and residential. The fourth area, this is the area that's south of 10, is more residential acreage with industrial and some commercial. And then the fifth area is heavily residential with some supporting commercial and some industrial. So the foundation, the framework for this plan is the circulation plan. Bob is. So Bob will give you kind of a highlights of this section, and then we'll go through the rest of the infrastructure.
Before we go to transportation, if I could, the staging priorities,
Yes.
you came up with those, I assume, as a result of input from various parties. Those aren't your recommendations per se?
No, that's
Those
what
are,
we expect to see.
okay.
And they're generalized lines. It just seems likely, based on the activity that we have seen recently, that is how development would proceed in the future. Ready to move on to transportation?
All right, one of the key things that we use for the approach on developing a proposed roadway system out here is looking at the constraints. 116th on the truck route and near the interchange, the DOT has already specified where access points will be allowed in the future, and those are represented by 15 westward, and as we move south, an extension of Fairway. They would not allow any more access points in Fairway north to the top of the stream based on what they have now out there for the truck bypass. So we had to work around that. We also worked around the drainage areas and the terrain and existing oil wells, existing dairy farm and development, and how we might see a future road system developing out in this area. So instead of on the north side, you see something that, you know, represents a typical grid pattern, half a mile spacing between collectors and materials. On the south side, it's more dictated by terrain, drainage constraints, and some of those other physical constraints out there. So we have the concern that we want to make sure we can accommodate development on both sides of the road, make it economically feasible. The dots and circles represent those key intersections. Many of those would be candidates for where there could be a roundabout or there could be a traffic signal. And the decision of the roundabout might be more economically made when we're planning the right-of-way, clearing that right-of-way through the development process, rather than having to purchase that later. That makes a retrofit much more expensive if you're really. We are looking at, you know, old Highway 10 is a minor arterial, the same as an extension of Fairway. However, Highway 10 has a much longer east-west function beyond the limits of this area, and we would hope that that would preserve a little higher speed function out there, currently 55 miles an hour. And maybe as we get more closely spaced development, more traffic issues, maybe that would have to be lowered a little bit, but we'd still like to see that a higher speed facility than just an urban street that might be 25 to 35 miles an hour. We do show that future overpass at 50th. We really looked at whether we could fit one in here and where's the need. However, the terrain is such that there's really not a lot of opportunity for north-south continuity anywhere else between this interchange, the existing interchange, and 50th. So really 50th is the one opportunity for a good north-south arterial across the interstate. This slide represents just if we develop all of those our roads within each of these zones, what is that total cost? This should be based on developing the road to the ultimate section. 35th Street or 21st as we know it in town. the east-west road across the north side of the study area. Right now, that doesn't exist in portions of that. Being that's a minor arterial, is that something that we're going to go out there and immediately construct a 5-lane for 3 miles across the study area? Maybe not. But these cost estimates represent the ultimate section of what would ultimately be out there in the long-term future. In the 2035 plan, we developed some recommended roadway cross-sections for each type of roadway. We did look at that again, and it seems to be fitting the area. So again, we're representing the same roadway cross-sections for future planning, future developments, depending on the type of classification. The principal arterial here probably refers to primarily 116th, the truck route north of the interstate. What we're looking at for most of the federal aid roads in this area would be the collectors in the minor arterial.
Do you have any questions on transportation? Right, when we're talking about water, you want to talk about it? You like? I do. This is a preview of coming attractions.
Well, I was really glad to see you undertake your West Side study, as we were working on the water master plan, and we were going to go over with you tonight. I kept seeing development occurring to the west, so I was going, we better come up with a plan and see what we need to do to deliver water out to this part of the growing area of the city. And what the West Area Study now has really helped define what that might look like. What's highlighted here, the darker lines, is the main infrastructure we need to deliver the water out into this portion of the city. Again, just that infrastructure alone in 2014 dollars is about $25 million in order to do that. But once that infrastructure is in place, the rest of the system can expand away from that and be able to service that area if you so desire. What this really does is create a loop. This takes off from your existing system, loops around, and goes back, and this triangle will actually be a storage facility to the far west side.
This is 116.
Right. And what we've done on a lot of these displays, and we'll talk about that, we have them with the aerial and without the aerial. And the aerial helps you locate where they're at. Sometimes without it on the background, it kind of colors when we put them up on the screen like this. So, in our action report, there's the same drawing like this, but it has an aerial on it, so you know exactly where you're at in the roadway.
Brent, I can't recall. Is that the water storage tank in zone 2 or zone 3?
So,
Thank you.
most of the west side, except falls within zone, except for this little portion that drops down. It's here, right? The rest of this is all of it. That's in zone 3, the rest of this is all in zone 2, which makes it very nice. And that expands a lot right across the city.
And then, do you have a future slide that's going to explain what these projects are, or are you going to comment, tell us what, for example, Project 11C is, and so on and so forth?
Okay, we'll start at the top. This is an extension of the 12-inch water main out and down. The towers are located in this general area. From this, we have an 18-inch that comes back and ties into the system. And this is another dedicated line, similar like what we're doing up to the north side, that allows you to give water way out to the west side. There wouldn't be any connections to this line until it gets to this point. So this is your main trunk to be able to get the water, the quantity of water we need to service that area. And these numbers come from the water utility master plan. So we have a series of projects ahead of us right now. In the list that we have, we certainly can address those and move those around as they
So 11B, 11C, they're just sections of the same project? Okay.
You know, ideally, we'd like to see that loop system. It's a lot easier to feed off it. I think, it would be best if we could do it all at once, but that's not always practical, it might have to be done in stages.
So I just did it. Some quick math, that's roughly $26 million. That's what it would take to bring water to exit 56.
This entire loop system, yes.
Yes.
If you're gonna do the whole loop system. End of story.
End of story.
Well, crystal ball, I guess it all depends upon where you see your city growing. What this is providing is what you would need to do to take care of this area. Just like we're making recommendations for other parts of the city, so you have a basically, this is what you need to do if development occurs here. Right. And I think these are just things that you're gonna have to continue to monitor, somebody's gonna have to stay on top of it, there's no doubt about that. There's a lot of things, and we'll talk some more about them this evening too, but there's just a lot of things that you have to stay on top of.
Mr. Malsom, if you were given the go-ahead right now to design and construct this corridor, this loop, when would that completion probably occur?
You ready for 2016 construction?
You'd begin in 2016?
You got the right one? Mr. Cohen?
Brent, if we did develop this, would we have enough source water to feed this whole area?
I guess I have to answer that depends. Depends on what other parts of the city are going to develop for more importantly. And we'll cover that again tonight, so that's an important thing that needs to be talked about.
We looked at a capital improvement plan today. I think you heard most of that conversation. None of these projects are on the capital improvement plan, correct?
I think this,
Is that correct, Sean?
is that the one we were talking about?
This loop is not included at all in the capital improvements plan.
Yeah, okay.
There are placeholders, however, for water extensions and sewer extensions that could be applied.
Sure.
But specifically called out, this project is not in.
Is your Project 10 and Project 11E the same project?
Say again?
Project 10 and Project 11E, is that the same site? You don't have the 10 on there, but up here you talked about a storage facility to secure the far west side.
That's 11.
10 and 11E is the same.
I gotta get to my full map to see what 10 was. See 10 on the, I'll have to get my other map. I'll make sure I have that answer for you tonight.
Item is wastewater. And, Brett will present his full study that's completed tonight. And, Scott, oops, here we go. Scott will present, the wastewater, and his study for the West Dickinson area only is included in the appendix of the material you have. And I gave you a couple of replacement pages because I messed up on that.
take just a few minutes to go through the infrastructure that will be required to service this area from the wastewater needs for a full build-out. Thought it was important we take a look at a couple of existing pieces of infrastructure that are in place that were constructed this past summer and into the fall. Those being the Highway 10 gravity sewer line that starts at 116th and extends over to Duck Creek. It all falls into the Highway 10 lift station, which then pumps those flows easterly towards the west pump station along the Highway 10 corridor. Those two systems were both sized for what was known at the time, which included the Dakota Prairie refinery flows, as well as South Hart, and some allowances for expansion of development within this area. When we take a look at the full build-out of the west area, we looked at the wastewater flows from the full build-out, and those flow projections were based on the proposed land use that Karen presented. The flows are based on those textbook numbers that we use, based on the land use that she provided. You guys are probably all familiar with this area. It generally flows from north to south towards Patterson Lake. That allows us to use those natural drainages to sewer this area with gravity sewer mains until we get to the Highway 10 corridor, where we have a series of pump stations that will be required for full build-out of this area. The dark red lines on the screen are those extensions of gravity trunk lines. The dashed red lines are force mains, where we would pump various sewer sheds up to a gravity line or up to another pump station. And this is one layout for those pump stations, a series of how they're pumped. There's several iterations that could happen based on how the development progresses. I guess I should mention there are actually 8 separate sewer sheds within this planning area based on the topography and the natural drainage, starting with W1 down in the southwest corner and extending up to W8. This little piece of natural drainage that flows up into Pinecrest in the northeast portion of this planning area. The total costs are in order of about $49 million for full build-out of this area. We can go through each of those projects. They're basically all a trunk line and a lift station, pumping to another lift station, then ultimately to the west pump station, which is located, a piece of existing infrastructure located just north of Highway 10 and on the west side of the West Business Loop. Just one note about that piece of infrastructure, the west pump station. What are the effects of this planning area to that pump station? That lift station was designed for the 2013 comprehensive plan, which allowed for an additional 21,000 people to live in that sewer shed in northwest Dickinson. So as of the 2013 numbers, that lift station can handle 21,000 additional people for either northwest Dickinson or this west planning area. So it just depends on where the growth happens. The recommendation is to monitor the flows into that lift station, and when we get to 75% capacity, take a look at what that upgrade is to that facility that's required to continue on growing in this area. Does anybody have any questions about the wastewater infrastructure? South Hart's included in the numbers. They've reserved the capacity within this Highway 10 existing gravity sewer that was designed for their flows, and they're included in these numbers.
They're not in terms of kind of the percentage of the potential load. They're a pretty small percentage, are they not?
Yeah, they're very minor. I think they're maybe in the range of 200 GPM contraction. I'm not sure what was landed on. But we're talking about major flows compared to 200 GPM for the entire area. If there's anything on that, just real briefly about reuse, I think we talked about it in the last meeting a little bit. As Mr. Kessel indicated, the reuse line is in place to Dakota Prairie Refinery to this location. The city reserved capacity within that line and paid for an upsizing of that line to be able to bring that reuse water up into this area. This is just that force main that could very easily be extended up to the 116th Old Highway 10 intersection for a potential load-out facility or wholesale of that reused water. These different colors represent different potentials for, industry, serving the industry in that area, or even potentially taking it up to that interchange. There's been a lot of discussion about that. But I just thought I'd put that slide up there that can be done. The booster station that's currently being constructed at the water reclamation facility can deliver that reused water up into this area. We just need to extend the force mains up into this area.
And excuse me, Scott, Mr. Kessler, we did have the fill station on our capital, but we didn't have that force main up to 160, if that's the direction we want to go.
Scott, have you figured out a capital cost to that line?
I don't believe we have yet, Mr. Kessel, but we will be working on that as part of that whole fill station concept.
Thank you.
Joe Bonbeck is quickly go through the community facilities.
Commissioners, everyone, good evening. In addition to evaluating the roads, sewer, water infrastructure requirements, we also took a look at community services, including fire, police, emergency medical, schools, and parks and trails. So very quickly, the fire department will be operating out of 2 sites that you see specified with the red stars by the summer or fall of next year. The blue areas represent those areas that are approximately 1.5 miles from those red stars, which is the limit of the service capacity to meet the ISO Class 4 rating that you currently enjoy. And what you can see then is that the study area outlined in red doesn't get any benefit from either of those blue diamonds. That means that you will need at least one additional fire site to provide additional service into the study area. And we're locating that roughly at the 114th or future 50th Avenue. The reason that that's there in part is because right now, if you locate it north of the interstate, you'll see you're not able to serve the area south of the interstate at all in that time frame. And of course, consequently, if you locate it south of the interstate, you won't be able to serve the area north in that time frame. After the overpass is constructed, you should be able to see the area at the bottom of the page being served. Before I go on and talk about schools, I just want to highlight that the police department does have a process in place right now where they have areas, traffic control areas where they basically have satellite offices set up around the city to help facilitate effective use of small area circulation for the patrols. And that same concept would be utilized. The idea would be that they would have a satellite office in both of 2 future fire stations. The one that you see in the star, the white star above it, because there's such a large area that's not covered by the blue in the study area, eventually you're going to have to see a 4th fire station or a 4th fire site that also would have a police station located there, or a police office located there. With regard to schools, I just want to highlight that right now, as you can see on this map, there are 2 school districts that service the study area. You can see that the total number of residents that we would anticipate at build-out is a large number, especially for the South Park School District. We don't have any anticipated facilities planned or known, but we can see from the number of school-age kids that would be there at build-out that there certainly would be a need for substantial additional facilities. I want to highlight too that the ambulance service that is currently serving Dickinson has a goal of serving all calls 90% of the time within 9 minutes. And they're currently located close to the heart of the city, I think just north of the interstate, and basically they cannot now serve that entire developed part of the city within that time frame. As the city continues to grow to the west, that's going to become even more problematic. They're looking at the idea of an additional site, and they have not yet a confirmed site for where that could be. The site of that third fire station would be an ideal location from their perspective, but I think there are some issues that are involved in that. Finally, I want to talk just briefly about parks and trails. There is an intent, as I understand it, on the part of the Park District to do a complete facilities planning process next year. We did take a look at possible future trails that would extend from your existing adopted trails plan, and the yellow dotted lines you see here represent those likely great spots for extension because they utilize the greenways overlays that Karen talked about in the land use planning portion. The east-west parts of those trails follow major roadways that would be presumably constructed concurrently, the trails and the roads. They will tie down into the Crooked Crane Trail at Lake Havasu. And if you have any specific questions you'd like to ask me about costs, I could highlight them in detail, but just to note that there are some significant capital costs, especially with the fire department, around $8.35 million at the point of build out, and that would also probably require some hiring of full-time fire people instead of volunteers as you have now, and annual costs for something like that might be in the neighborhood of $693,000. The ambulance service would need an additional capital cost someplace in the neighborhood of $1.2 million, and eventually they will need additional staffing someplace in the neighborhood of $438,000 annually. And finally, the police department has certainly significant, although more incremental, demand for increases in staffing. Their total staffing would probably, at the time of build out, run about 1.5 million additional dollars for staffing.
As I mentioned, we have a number of, this is, the West Dickinson study would be an appendix to the existing plan, so that the policies that are in the existing plan would apply to this area. But we've also proposed some additional policies, and one of them is we propose that you consider adopting levels of service. The levels of service that are on this slide and in the document are suggestions, but we're really looking for your consideration of adopting the concept. We can work out the details later. These levels of service would help you to be able to benchmark the levels of service basically that you want to provide, and to be able to understand yourselves whether you are meeting your aspirations. And then when you're looking to be partners with the private sector, it would give you more standing to do that. The levels of service usually are applied to the items that are listed here, to water, wastewater, fire flow, parks, police, response time, roadways, and emergency medical service. And the graphic that's on there is from the Dickinson 2035. The green are roads that are currently A and B. I guess to explain a little bit, the levels of service on roads represent the easy flow of traffic, basically. So if it's in a level of service, A is the best, which is basically free-flowing, and C is fairly average, and it goes down to F, which is pretty much parking lot standard. Level of service C is what's shown on that graphic, which is a couple years old now, in yellow, and the rest of it is either A or B. In some jurisdictions, there's an overall level of service that they aspire to, or And in other locations, in many other locations, they look for levels of service on specific roads or specific categories of roads. You know, on your main your principal arterials, who want those to flow at a certain level. Or there may be some roads that are physically constrained. Anyway, so we're looking for your consideration of adopting levels of service to address items such as the ones that are on here. The other policies, we're suggesting that we add those 4 future land use categories: the interchange, limited industrial, planned residential, and greenway overlay that are not currently in your plan, and adopt corridor overlays to 116th and old Highway 10. Parts of Highway 10 are already included in the corridor overlay, so that you can guide the a number of things. One, access to the roads, and also what the roads are going to look like and feel like when you go through them. And also on the interchange, that there be design guidelines for that interchange. One of the key related to the levels of service is an adequate facilities program. And this would be a way for the city to measure development proposals against those benchmarks of adequate facilities being available or assured. The text that's in the document has more language, but this basically is to establish levels of service for future development, and development proposals would be approved only when the adequate public facilities either exist or they're assured. And the assured can come through lots of different ways. Could come through the CIP, could come through a development agreement, or some way that you know that when that development is approved, that it's going to have the facilities that it needs. And you often do that already through your annexation, reviews, and to see if the facilities are available, then you annex properties. So this would be looking for development approvals for that same issues. Water, wastewater, transportation, police and fire protection, essentially. And also a policy says that you would review development proposals for parks, recreation facilities, and areas stormwater management. There are a lot of other policies, more of ensuring that the areas that are within your extraterritorial area are prepared for urban services when they come. And I'm not going to go through that. The text is in the document that you have. So basically, the next steps that we need. We need your input on the future land use map. Does that make sense to you? The growth staging, the general areas of staging that we have proposed. We hope that you will approve the city adopting a level of services concept. The specifics of it, we can work that out later. And also hope that you will agree to adopting an adequate public facilities program. But we need your input, particularly on those. We also would like your comments. You have a copy of the draft. Any text or any things that are in there that need to be updated. Mr. Kessel told me the other day the sales tax in Williston has increased recently, so I will add that. They now top the state. They have that distinct honor at 8%. So I will, adjust that. But if there are any points of information that need to be added, or any questions that you have, our team is available to you, and we will talk to you about the schedule. So our next steps are to complete the draft document, to incorporate any input from today and today's meeting, in the next couple of weeks, and we need to finalize the cost estimates, and develop an executive summary, and then schedule public hearings. And you want to talk a little bit about the public hearings, or so that's what the next steps for this are.
With respect to the public hearings, I want to be respectful of your time as the Planning Commission and also the City Commission as well. We could do various ways of doing it. We could do a combined meeting like we've done in the past. We did for a comprehensive plan and what we've done thus far. If we were going to do that, we would set up a meeting in September, not September, but January, have the first reading of it, and then the second reading would be through the city commission. If we decided to do that, we'd need to pick a date sometime in the middle of the month. If that works, probably the second meeting of the city commission, similar to what we're doing today. I believe that I haven't looked at the dates for that, but that would be my suggestion. Or if you want to do them separately, have the final document brought forth through planning commission as a regularly scheduled agenda item. Take comments with that, and then bring it forth for final adoption at the city commission in February. So I'd like to open that up to see what your preference would be. My suggestion with respect to the comments of the draft plan would be at least 2 weeks, probably the first week of January. If you could submit all your comments into the city and or KLJ so we could incorporate those into the final draft.
And we're happy to take those comments however you want. If you want to, send hand scratching and deliver that to the city, or mark up a copy, or if you want to schedule time to talk about any of the questions, we're happy to do any of that. It's just really important that we have your input and understand what your concerns or challenges might be with any of this stuff.
Have you concluded with the formal presentation?
Yes, we have.
So at this time, would either commissioners from planning and zoning or the city care to make any comments about what you heard this afternoon or read? In general, what you heard, did you tend to agree with them?
Well, there's a lot of information given out, but I do like the future land use boundaries and so on. I was kind of concerned about what they'd do south of the railroad tracks as far as recreational or residential, and keep it separate between the light industrial and residential and so on, and what type of boundaries they were going to use there. I think with the boundaries that I saw, I feel comfortable with them. Of course, we haven't heard from anybody that lives out in that area or anybody that anticipates building a business out in that area, but I felt comfortable with the map that they provided.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Anyone else care to comment?
After reading through this entire document, I felt comfortable with the direction that we're going for the city, especially with building out on existing access points, not giving entitlements until those services could be provided. Essentially, it would give the city more direction in controlling not only the way they wanted the city to go, in what direction, and also it gives an atmosphere to the city that the city fathers wanted to have, to provide them also with a handle on the economics of it.
Yeah, I would agree, especially on the entitlement side. When you look at just the water and the wastewater side of it, that was $75 million just to provide those two essential services. That's not streets, that's not any of the other infrastructure that goes in. Those are two necessary components just to start moving development in that direction. So the entitlement side of it is a huge area that we need to define, that we can afford to provide those services before we allow development over there.
I would have, Mr. President, I guess one of my big concerns is how much discussion has there been between Dickinson and South Art in the school districts? And are they, what's the, the serious consideration of moving it, or is South Art gonna seriously look at building a school in that area? There's a lot of people going into that area. And being this close to to Dickinson, a lot of the people that are going to move into that area are probably going to want their kids to go to Dickinson.
Commissioner Decker, I can't make any comments as to the boundaries of the school districts themselves. We did have a recent meeting with the top administrators with the Dickinson School District, and I can tell you that their plan is to secure some land at the corner of 21st and 50th for a future grade school site. That would represent the extreme western boundary of the current Dickinson School District. But beyond that, I'm not aware of any other schools being constructed in that area. Obviously, that's a concern that's been raised several times in the public hearings for this project specifically. That concern has been raised. There's been several meetings with its regard, even to the point where Governor Dalrymple has appointed a special staff person to assist with the discussions with regard to that school district boundary.
When you talk about school district boundaries and that specific boundary, is that something that could be decided by the Dickinson School District, South Hart, or does the state become involved in that?
Commissioner Steiner, I'm certainly not an expert on school district boundaries. I can tell you a couple things. First of all, that they are independent of city boundaries. We have no influence over school district boundaries whatsoever. Since it is an existing school district boundary that would change, both districts would have to be involved. The South Hart School District would have to be willing to move or give up some property, and the Dickinson School District would have to be willing to accept that property. So I believe that to be a mutually a decision needed to be made by both parties.
If I may, I had, when I looked over this, I had one thought on this that I thought we should actually put to some developers out there. I think it's a bigger question to the developers themselves, that if they hadn't thought about it, and they're probably way ahead of me, how is that going to impact your development? People wanting to or not wanting to live in a certain school district or locate there if you're dealing with residential properties and different sort of tax bases. I think that the developer should be made aware of that it may affect their development.
Mr. Abrahamson, the developers are well ahead of us in that respect. They know where the boundaries are, and you know, they've been involved in discussions with the city and from both school districts. And we're not the only community in North Dakota that would have multiple school districts within city limits. Should the need arise to where we actually have to expand into this West Dickinson area, you know, we'll be just like a handful of other cities that have multiple school districts really within the metropolitan area. Other comments?
I guess the only difference on that is that when you look at the projections for where students would end up, we ended up with 694 new students through all that development. South Hart ended up with 2,900 new students, 2,800 new students. For a school district the size of Dickinson to take on another 700 students, probably doable. For a school district the size of South Hart to take on 2,800 students, that would seem monumental.
I think we're talking about something that is, well, I mean, I'm not going to say it's not going to occur, but I mean the probability of it occurring is relatively low. If the school boundaries remain as they are today, the district boundaries, that may influence greater residential development, say to the north in our city, or even to the east or the south. So if that's important to Dickinson families, that their children stay within the Dickinson school district, I mean, they'll force developments other direction rather than to the west. And again, I mean, I can't remember the numbers, but in the meeting right prior to this one, you know, we were Mr. Curtin was talking about the infrastructure we've put in place or are planning to put in place and how many dwelling units that would accommodate. And I think it was one of our commissioners here asked you, you know, well, how many residents per dwelling unit, and it was somewhere maybe around 2.5. Well, when we look at all the dwelling units that could be really, and I think all those were within the Dickinson School District that you were looking at. I have the number. There was just over 15,000 dwelling units. Well, if you average just 2, that's 30,000 people. We're not even into the West Dickinson area.
Right.
So, in terms of planning, the city looks to me like, you know, we could accommodate between what we have, say, in our traditional area, plus West Dickinson. You know, we're probably talking 60,000 people. So I think it was Karen that said when she opened her remarks something to the fact that, you know, this plan is beyond 2035 in all likelihood, that this is a 2050 or a 2060 plan, and one that is fairly optimistic. But it's good to have a long-range plan. It's better to have a plan and not use it, to not have a plan and then wish you had one. So I don't think if there's someone from Southard here, I don't think you're in any imminent danger of gaining 2,900 students, you know, overnight.
Like you said, it's important to get this as far out as we can. I look at how quickly our 2035 plan became a 2020 plan in a lot of instances, just because of the extreme growth. So you're right, it's nice to push it out as far as we can.
I mean, it's just likely that, you know, this could all come to fruition, but it may be 40 years from now before it reaches that build-out stage, or even but there are aspects of that area that would develop, you know, especially along the I-94 corridor and the 116 corridor. It's already happening.
Karen, would it be possible to put up the slide that showed the growth expected along those corridors that Dennis just mentioned, that Mayor Johnson?
While she's searching for that, does anybody else have questions or comments here?
You know, I think it's a really good exercise that we're going through here. You know, we don't know how fast and how much of this is going to be developed, but we've got a really good tool here now to manage infrastructure, to manage services, to manage land use. I expect we'll probably tweak land use as we go forward, and as well as the rest of it, but I think it's well done, and I think it was really worthwhile. Put a little different perspective on the population part of it. I believe the study said, and I'm looking for it, I can't find it, but I believe the study said that with the suggested land use, the area would hold 25,000, 27,000, something like that. You know, we're 27,000 now, and showing that we'll be 39 or 40, and that doesn't include all the undeveloped ground we have in Dickinson right now. So we really need to keep that perspective on it. But I still think it's a good exercise and well done.
Is this the slide you were looking for?
This is the slide, and the only reason that I asked Ms. Day to put this up is because of the staging and the growth. You know, stage 1 and stage 2 are the two that are expected in the most imminent future. And you'll notice that stage 1 has about 556 residential parcels. Is that remind me again, is that 556 dwelling units? Acres, excuse me, acres of development in stage 1, which is predominantly that area north of the interstate and Barron's Vista. And then stage 2 is very little in terms of residential, more industrial and commercial. But those are the first two phases that would build out. And you know, we have developers in the room who'd like to see that exit 56 completed by 2015, which means that stage 1 would provide 556 acres of residential growth, the vast majority of that in the South Park School District.
Any other comments by either planning and zoning members or city commission members? I know this isn't a public hearing, but we have a little extra time. We would take some public comment, or is it a public hearing? So, it is now. But if anyone would like to comment, you know, just come to the podium and give us your name and go ahead and make your comment.
Hi, Mr. President, members of the commission, and everybody else. Galen Baker with Stark Development Corporation. I guess the one thing I was disappointed in the land use portion was that it looked to me like the general industrial was basically limited to what already is general industrial. And that any additional industrial space there was limited industrial. And I really think that as time goes by, there's going to be a much larger demand for general industrial space out there. You know, general industrial is where we really make things. And, you know, limited industrial, we kind of service the making of things. And I really believe that, that if we're going to do a good job of advancing the economy of the area, we have to get to general industrial. We have to make things. And we, you know, and there'll be plenty of room for those people that need to supply the making of things. But I would like to see a little more general industrial, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Baker.
The limited industrial has been labeled limited industrial just to distinguish it from the industrial that's already there, that's already entitled. So we wanted to be able to identify. There's no difference in the uses that are allowed, one or the other. It's just that in the limited industrial, and we could call it some other kind of industrial, new industrial, we would have the opportunity to look at the compatibility between that and existing uses, for instance, or other kind of standards that you may want to impose on it.
Thank you, Ms. Day. Any other member of the public wish to comment?
I think what Mr. Baker was partially referring to, and we both sit on the Stark Development Corporation, that there could be one or two businesses that would need to be on the industrial side that could pop some big employee numbers and so on that would, in fact, would probably drive the residential section second to where, you know, I think we're kind of looking towards the residential, you know, zone 1 first and 2 second, where it could very well go the opposite way.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Anybody else wish to comment?
President Johnston and members of the task force, Larry Nygaard from Road Development. Obviously, you all know we have a big stake in this part of the Dickinson area, and we're excited to see the growth potential out there. And there's a lot of it. We have a lot of interest from a lot of different companies, so we're excited to see this process move forward. You touched upon an issue that I want to bring up, and that is, you know, the sheer magnitude of the cost of developing this entire area. And I think somebody put a north of $75 million, and Commissioner Oldman pointed out that's a lot of money. Well, I think that the difficult thing that we're all going to have to work with is we're probably not all going to be able to sit in the starting gate until we have $75 million to go do all the infrastructure at one time. The demand is going to come incrementally. It's not going to come all at once. So we're going to have to figure out as a group how we can accommodate some of the needs that are right on the cusp of happening as soon as next year as part of the overall plan.
nice if all 100 million or 75 million could be spent and the whole area put into service, but we know that's just not practical. There's going to be other priorities that get ahead of this. So we're going to be coming forth with some plans. I think we've already submitted some of those that take a portion of this service area and attempt to develop it in the real hotspots. And we've identified them. They're going to be right around the exchange, the intersection of I-94 and 116, where we know there's demand right now, and there's people that want to be in there, and we're going to have to struggle with how to accommodate that need. The other thing, from a developer standpoint, Ms. Day has brought up 3 or maybe 4 different zoning, what I call new zoning criteria, and that kind of scares developers a lot, because when you take a big chunk of a development, for example, like we have, and call it interstate development, without defining what it means, I might be in 100% agreement with that use, or I might be in 100% disagreement with that use. I just don't know enough about it, and it hasn't been defined to the point where we can really opine on that. So it's going to be difficult from an opinion standpoint to say whether or not we can agree with something like that when it's not defined. We probably all agree on the same uses, but how you define them by zone is something that's going to be a consideration. The third point I want to talk about a little bit is about the schools and the boundaries, and they absolutely make a huge difference where builders are going to be building in the future. So that's a primary consideration. It's something that we're very on top of. We want to make sure that if we expand residential housing opportunities in an area, that we're going to have adequate schools and services to accommodate that. So that is a big concern of all of us. And we think there's a lot of growth potential in the single-family area for Dickinson. We think there's been a shortage, and so we just hope that we can continue bringing some of that product to the Dickinson market.
Thank you, Mr. Maggard. Anybody else wish to comment? Is there any other business here then? So if we have additional comments as we kind of digest what we've heard here today and what we read, we should communicate those directly to you, Karen, is that?
Either to me at KOJ or to the city, either way.
Or
We
to,
talk to them all the
yeah,
time.
okay.
And we just really would like your comments or your questions or anything at all, so I'm sure that we can hear them about this final version. And if we could have those, with the holidays, it's asking a lot to do. If we could have them by the end of the first week of January, whatever comments you line up.
I think that's doable.
Celebrate the new year and then read the book again.
Okay. All right.
And then we need to, if you had any opinion today of whether you wanted another joint meeting or to do the planning and zoning separate or yourselves.
That's right. Mr. Khan raised the question about, additional public hearings here. How do we want to do this? Do we want to do it jointly, or do we want planning and zoning to do those?
Joint.
Mr. Jackson, says joint?
Yeah.
Mr. Elkins says joint?
Agree with that too?
Yes, Mr. President, if we were going to do that, our second meeting, we wouldn't be able to make the first meeting in January, but our second meeting in January would be the 20th. The 19th is our regularly scheduled date, but that's a holiday, so it'd be the subsequent day. It'd be Tuesday, so it'd be the 20th. So we could plan on that to be our the adoption or the first reading of the final version of the West Dickinson plan, and go ahead and get that scheduled if that works for everybody.
So the Tuesday, January 20th, sometime in the afternoon or so. Can we commit to that?
Don't have Rita here to be able to check the schedule to see if there's any conflicting meetings prior to that, but I don't anticipate that. It's something that we could let all the members know probably before our 4:30 meeting tonight.
Works on my calendar, so we can do it.
That works.
How about the rest of you?
Works on mine.
Looks good.
Looks good, so let's book it, huh? So, will we do it at 2:30, is that?
Yeah.
2:30 works if that,
Give
I
us
think we'll
enough
have
time.
about the same, I mean, we've had about the same public showing up for the meetings, the same general comment, so 2:30 could work in everyone's schedule.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I don't think Rita's in the room, but if, Ed, if you could let her know, or Mr. Bowling let her know to send out those notices. We have to change the or what would have been a meeting on the 19th to the 20th anyway, so. Okay, anything else? Would there be, Mr. Chairman Abrahamson, anything you'd like to comment on, or?
No, I think it was a really good productive meeting. It was great.
Okay. Well, with that, Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn then.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The motion carries. We're adjourned.